So we're really happy to be collaborating on these roundtables as the Red Crescent Climate Center with ICRC as well as our partner ODI. These roundtables are taking place across the globe. The first one was in East Africa, focusing on the Greater Horn of Africa perspective that began the series. It continued into Abidjan to focus on West Africa and the Sahel, followed by The Hague to look at a European perspective, and then this roundtable here. I'm next going to Manila, and then DC, and then back to Geneva. Yeah, so across the roundtables, people, the experts that we've been gathering together have widely agreed that people living in areas affected by conflict are highly vulnerable to climate shocks. And so that's been consensus across all of the roundtables. On the topic of climate finance, there's also been consensus that as a global community, we need to do more to make sure that the architecture that we have in place can better fund adaptation measures in conflict areas. It's at a high level an agreement that we've made to reach the most vulnerable, but in the practice, there are still steps to be taken to be able to realize that operationally. For some of the other topics, there have been different perspectives on the security sector conversation. In some cases, it's seen as an opportunity to raise the profile of people's voices through an existing platform. In other cases, we've had experts telling us that there needs to be a new narrative also coming to light that focuses more on this double vulnerability aspect. But it's been quite an interesting experience, especially seeing those areas of consensus around the world from different regional experts, and of course then getting lots of really nice recommendations from those who are working on this topic in the day-to-day. So for the Horn of Africa experience, one of the things that the Red Crescent has been doing there as well as in other parts of the world to adapt the humanitarian system is a topic called forecast-based financing. So this is a really nice example of the way that humanitarian systems may need to adapt. The concept of forecast-based financing is to use better scientific information that's coming out to anticipate disasters before they occur, so a natural hazard before it occurs, to take action to try and prevent the impacts of disasters. This is something new that's more possible to do now because of advances in science, but it also requires that adaptation of the humanitarian system to be able to move fast enough to have an impact based on the forecasting information that we're having. This is one really concrete example of the way humanitarian systems need to adapt, to not only think about the long-term trends that we may be experiencing due to climate change, but to also manage the uncertainty that comes along the way and the more extremes, the more extreme rainfall or the more extreme drought that we'll be facing as we continue into the future, which puts people in a highly vulnerable place. So I think there's two different answers here. First, if we look at the general trends, let's say for the region, there is a projection, and it's already starting to be seen, that temperatures will become more extreme. And that can also mean more frequent heat waves in the future, which can have an important impact on people's health, especially when it's combined with existing health conditions. We also, through scientific evidence, see an increased chance of more droughts occurring, which has an important implication in when you bring that into the context of managing water resources, not only today but in the future. The trend of rainfall is a bit uncertain. There's not really consensus. But another trend which has a lot more certainty around it is sea level rise. For those countries that have coastal borders, and especially cities on coastal areas, in the future they'll need to be already thinking today how to manage in the future the risk of rising sea levels as well. So those are some of the trends. When you consider the aspect of climate and conflict, our main focus is to think about how these trends impact places that are in conflict. So if you're in a place that's experiencing conflict, a lot of the systems that may be supporting you may have different challenges that make you more vulnerable as an individual, as a community, as a wider group. And therefore, the shocks that you feel from these changing climate risks may be felt more intensely. And we see that, for example, in the Horn of Africa with the drought that occurred a few years ago, where countries that were in more fragile states, there are people who are affected more than neighboring countries who are still affected, but the systems were in place to decrease some of that vulnerability to the shocks.